At number 20, the 1972 Pittsburgh Steelers, the third of the Steelers 1.0 version to show up on the list. This team was second in points against the pass and first in turnovers and yards allowed per play. They were led by All-Pro defensive tackle Mean Joe Green and Pro Bowlers linebacker Andy Russell and defensive end Dwight White. Now, the undefeated Dolphins had better stats for the season, but after the adjustments were made for strength of schedule and the strength of their offense, it was very clear that this Steeler team had a much better defense. They finished at 11-3 and allowed only 15 touchdowns in a 14-game season. Only 9 teams on this list did better than that. 7 times in their last 10 games, they allowed 10 points or less. At number 19, the 1951 New York Giants. This defense was first in yards, turnovers, and rushing, and second in points and passing. They scored 5 defensive touchdowns, including 4 pick sixes in a 12-game season, picking off an incredible 41 passes in just 12 games. They had 3 All-Pros, safety Otto Schellenbacher, corner Emil Tunnel, and tackle Arnie Weinmeister. They also had a Pro Bowl tackle, Tex Coulter. They finished at 9-2-1, posting 2 shutouts and allowing more than 17 points only twice, despite having the worst offense in the league. Their offense was last in yards and first downs. This defense was incredible against the run, allowing only 2.3 yards per carry, a full yard per carry less than anyone else in the league, both of those numbers being the best in history. They spent significantly more time on the field than their offense, which makes them one of only 4 defenses on this list to have to carry that burden. At number 18 is the 1959 New York Giants. They were first in points, yards, passing, and rushing. They had 4 All-Pros, which ties for the most of any team on this list. Safety Jimmy Paxton, middle linebacker Sam Huff, tackle Rosie Brown, and defensive end Andy Robustelli. They also had a cornerback Lyndon Crow honored in the Pro Bowl. 6 times this defense gave up 10 or less points, and they finished at 10-2. They gave up only 324 penalty yards, ridiculous number. They averaged more than 10 points per game less than the league average and gave up 1,100 yards less in their 12-game season. At number 17, last year's 2019 New England Patriots. These 12-4 Pats started out 8-0 and gave up only 4 touchdowns and 4 field goals in those first 8 games. If they'd kept up at that pace, it would have been the greatest defense of all time. However, their schedule got a little tougher, and they had to settle for 17th. It is noteworthy that the Patriots' first 8 opponents started off their seasons 14-53, a paltry .209 winning percentage, with 9 of those 14 wins coming against that same pathetic group. In the end, with the tougher part of their schedule coming up and those teams that they played early in the season playing much better in the second half, their strength of schedule came out pretty average for a team on this list. 11 times they allowed 14 or less points and posted 2 shutouts. They also put 5 TDs on the board themselves. They were led by All-Pro corner Stephen Gilmore and Pro Bowler Donta Hightower. At number 16, the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers, the last and the best of the Steelers 1.0. In the 7 years from 72 to 78, they had a top 2 defense 5 times. Now that's the best since the AFL-NFL merged in 1970. This team is one of 9 teams to give up 1 or less touchdowns per game, giving up exactly 1, even though they played the toughest overall schedule of any team on this list with a .528 winning percentage. This Steeler team is famous for the greatest 9-game defensive run in history, finishing 9-0 in their last 9 regular season games and giving up only 28 points and 2 touchdowns over that stretch. Even though the teams they played had a combined .397 winning percentage, this is the most impressive 9-game stretch since 1950. Obviously, they played their toughest competition in their first 5 games, where they went 1-4. Including the playoffs, they were 4-5 against winning teams. They were first in points, yards, and rushing. 8 times they held opponents to 10 points or less. They posted 5 shutouts and allowed over 18 points only twice. They also scored 5 touchdowns and gave up the fewest penalty yards of any team in the league. This defense was led by All-Pro linebackers Jack Lambert and Jack Ham, and 5 Pro Bowlers. Corner Mel Blount, safety Glenn Edwards, corner J.T. Thomas, safety Mike Wagner, and defensive end L.C. Greenwood. At number 15, the 1969 Kansas City Chiefs. Finishing at 11-3, they upset the Vikings, turning them over 5 times in Super Bowl IV and claiming the second straight Super Bowl win for the AFL. In 1970, the AFL was joined by 3 NFL teams to form the AFC. In that first year, the original AFL teams finished 20 games below 500, and in 5 of the next 6 years, a team from the original NFL was playing for the AFC Championship. So, because the Chiefs played a much weaker schedule in the AFL, I had to make some sort of adjustment to their standing on this list. Their stats alone would have taken them higher. It can never be known if they had played a full schedule of NFL teams, if they would have ever been on this list at all. In the AFL, the Chiefs were first in everything: points, yards, turnovers, rushing, passing, and even penalty yards. They picked off 32 passes in the 14-game season. 8 times they held their opponents to 13 points or less and had 2 shutouts. They scored 4 defensive touchdowns. They're led by All-Pro linebackers Bobby Bell and Pro Bowlers cornerback Jim Marcellus, Johnny Robinson, and linebacker Willie Lanier. At number 14, the 1968 Baltimore Colts, the second Colt team from this era. This team was highly favored against Joe Namath's Jets in Super Bowl III, but the best team does not always win. They were first in points and second in yards and interceptions, and they gave up only 15 touchdowns in the 14-game season. They finished 13-1 and held opponents to 10 or less 10 times, posted 3 shutouts, and only twice did they give up more than 20. They also recorded 4 pick sixes. They're led by All-Pro corner Bobby Boyd, along with Pro Bowlers linebacker Mike Curtis and defensive tackle Fred Miller. At number 13, the 2013 Seattle Seahawks, the second of those Legion of Boom teams to make the list. They were first in points, yards, turnovers, passing, and red zone defense. They outscored their playoff opponents 89-40 in 4 games on their way to a championship. They finished their season at 13-3 and held opponents to 10 or less points 7 times. They scored 4 defensive touchdowns and allowed only 4 rushing touchdowns. They're led by All-Pro safety Earl Thomas and corner Richard Sherman, along with Pro Bowlers Cam Chancellor. They led the league in interceptions, not surprisingly, with 3 defensive backs getting postseason honors. They were the best defense from the decade of the 2010s. At number 12, the 2009 New York Jets. When you first look at the stats, they don't look that impressive. Certainly not high enough to get them this high on the list. But then you dig a little deeper and you find out that an astounding 49 points were given up by the offense and special teams. No other team on this list totaled more than 35 given up by the offense and special teams, and only 1 was that high. They were first in points, yards, passing defense. They gave up only 19 touchdowns, and only 8 came through the air. The next best in the league was 14, and they allowed only 128 first downs through the air, the next best being 155. 7 times they held opponents to 10 or less and had 2 shutouts. They finished 9-7, but they did make it to the AFC Championship game. This defense was clearly underrepresented for postseason honors, as only 2 players were recognized. All-Pro cornerback Darrelle Revis, and Pro Bowler defensive end Shaun Ellis. At number 11, the 1971 Minnesota Vikings, the Purple People Eaters. This team is the first one on the list to give up less than 1 touchdown per game, allowing just 12 touchdowns in a 14-game season and allowing only 2 rushing touchdowns. Alan Page was the first of only 2 defensive players ever to win a Most Valuable Player and the only defensive lineman. This Viking team had arguably the second worst offense in the league, but they finished 11-3. This is one of only 4 defenses on the list to spend more time on the field than their offense, and it is the highest ranked among those 4. They were first in points and against the pass and second in yards, competing against the great Colts defense. This defense gave up more than 13 points only twice, posted 3 shutouts, and 9 times held opponents to 10 or less. Amazingly, except for Page, Paul Krause, the all-time interception leader, was the only Viking defender to gain postseason honors, making the Pro Bowl. At number 10, the 1951 Cleveland Browns. This is the best of all the Browns' defenses, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that the Browns maintained a level of greatness over a 10-year period through the entire 1950s. Cleveland had a top 3 defense every year through the 50s and was number 1 from 1953 to 1957. This was pre-merger, and there were only 12 teams in the league, so that would be like being in the top 8 today. But this may be the most impressive stretch over a long period of time, and if not, it's definitely in the top 3. The 1951 Browns led the league in points, most turnovers by fumble, were second in yards, turnovers, and rushing defense, and third against the pass, competing with that great Giants defense that just came in at number 19. This defense posted 4 shutouts in 12 games and scored 5 defensive touchdowns. They featured All-Pro defensive end Len Ford and Pro Bowler Tony Adamle. Now, this is another team that seems to have been slighted in postseason awards, especially when you consider that there were only 12 teams. At number 9, the 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs were first in points, yard, passing defense, and interceptions. They gave up only 18 touchdowns in 16 games and scored 5 defensive touchdowns. This team gave up 600 less yards than their nearest rival. They finished 12-4 and 9 times allowed 10 points or less, never giving up more than 24 points in the first 60 minutes. They were highly decorated with 3 All-Pros, linebacker Derek Brooks, defensive tackle Warren Sapp, defensive end Simeon Rice, and 2 Pro Bowlers, safety John Lynch and linebacker Shelton Quarles. At number 8, the 1950 New York Giants. Along with the 51 Giants, this team is one of only 2 units made up of the same group of players to have multiple representatives in the top 20. They were first in yards allowed per play against the run, allowing only 2.9 yards per carry. They were first in forcing fumbles and second in points. They forced a total of 54 turnovers in the 12 games and 5 times held opponents to 7 or less. They boasted All-Pro tackle Arnie Weinmeister, along with 4 Pro Bowlers, linebacker John Canada, and Ray Poole, corner Emmon Tunnel, and safety Otto Schellenbacher. These 51 Giants met the 51 Browns in the playoffs, and the result was an 8-3 win for the Browns. Now that's defense. At number